Welcome back, it's Tony from Homa Pumps again. Today we're going to show you how to adjust the suction cover on a GRP pump. Um, it can be done in the field, at the wet well, or wherever you are. It's fairly simple and we'll go through that. All right, so let's get into the adjustment of the suction cover on a GRP. GRP stands for a grinder pump in the Homa world. And you can tell by looking at the bottom of it, you have a stationary cutter and you have a cutter on the impeller that spins, and that's how they do the cutting. Normally we're going to play with an adjustment on them is for a couple of reasons. If you're clogging, even though it's a grinder, you can still get clogs, or you can get stuff that gets stuck in here and wound up in it. A lot of times that means that our gap is too much and we need to take that gap up. And then there's other cases where you may be drawing higher amps than normal. And it could be because we're getting drag on the motor, which is creating the higher amps. So those are a couple of the reasons why that I would even mess with the adjustment here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to look, and once I pull it out, to see where we are with adjustment. If I can spin this impeller, and I always do it with an Allen wrench and not my fingers because you got two sharp edges there that you can be cutting yourself on. It's a 5mm Allen that goes into the impeller, and I spin it to see if it's spinning free or if it's tight. Okay, in this case, it's spinning freely, but almost too freely, so I'm going to say that we were probably having some issues of ragging, and we're going to try to address that at this point. And the way we're going to do that is we have cap screws and we have set screws. And those are the two types of screws we're going to use to make this adjustment. The cap screws, again, are 5mm. The set screws are 4mm. And those are the two Allens we're going to use. I'm going to start the adjustment by loosening the 3 cap screws. I'm not going to remove them because I'm not going to remove the plate. I just want to make an adjustment. So I'm going to loosen these up a few turns until I have a gap here so they're not sitting up against my suction cover. And then I'm going to go and loosen the set screws. Now the set screws are used in 2 different ways. It's used to set the plate, but it's also they can be used as a jacking screw to remove the plate if I had to remove this plate. So I'm going to bring these set screws out until they're flush or just past flush with the suction cover. Then I'm going to take soft blow mallet and I'm going to tap the cover in. I'm going to bring my cap screws back up until they make contact with my suction cover, and I'm going to try to turn the impeller. And as you can tell, it's locked in place now. I do this because I also want to see if my cutting ring here is still serviceable. If it was no longer serviceable and there was too much wear on it, pushing my suction cover to the bottom of my volute would have no effect. I'd still be able to spin the impeller. If I get to that point and I can still spin it, I must replace this, and we'll show you that later, how to replace that cutter. But if it does lock up, it means this cutter is still good and I can make the adjustment that I need. So this is locked up, so we will start the adjustment. What we're going to do again is I'm going to loosen up on the cap screws, the 3. And now I'm going to go to my set screws, and I'm going to bring those in until they just touch, and you'll be able to feel that. All right, now they're just touching. Now I want to bring each one, after they just touch, a quarter turn. It's doing that. Now I'm taking it and I'm using them as a jacking screw, and I'm jacking this housing suction cover back out. Okay. Once I do that at a quarter turn, I'm bringing my cap screws just to the bottom of that suction cover until it makes contact. Now I'm going to take and I'm going to try to turn my impeller. And you're listening to make sure you're not hearing any metal to metal, and you're also feeling for it. And if you could hear that, you could hear the metal grabbing there, which means I still need to do an adjustment. You don't want to leave it there, because then what you're going to do is you're going to wear that plate and the cutters, because you're going to have that metal to metal contact. So again, loosen up on your cap screws. Go back to your set screws, quarter turn. Back to the cap. And then back to the impeller. And now it's spinning freely. Okay? So now that I have it spinning freely, I need to set this all so the screws aren't going to fall out later. So I want to take my cap screws, tighten them. I want to check my set screws just to make sure that they're set and they're not loose in there. So they are. And we've just made that adjustment, but one final time I want to check the impeller just to make sure when I tightened everything else down, something didn't change on us. And it didn't. Okay? So that's the bottom plate, or bottom suction cover adjustment. All right, so we've made our adjustment, but if you remember previously I was talking about we might have to replace this cutting ring. So while we're here and it's tipped over, why don't we talk about it and do that now? There's two ways of doing this. The easiest way and the quickest way is to do it right from the bottom here with the 3 screws that are 3 millimeter. Okay, remove those 3 and see if the ring comes off. Sometimes I'm lucky, sometimes I'm not. I always try that first because that's always the easiest. So we're going to remove this, the 3 screws. You can see they're not real big, so be careful, especially when you're at the wet well. I've dumped a few. And we remove those. And then I'm going to take to the sides of it with my finger or a pair of pliers, and I'm going to pull out on it. If it comes out, we're all good, okay, and we can replace it from the bottom. What I'm looking for is damage here, wear here, if it's down too far to the bottom and there's chips and gouges out of this surface, any of these surfaces here is what I know I need to replace. All right, so this came out really easy. So we'll put this back, and again, it's going to go back on the same way it came off, but then we're also going to show you, let's say I can't get it from the bottom. How else am I going to replace this? And we'll show you that also. So I'm going to take this. Again, I'm careful because there are some sharp edges here. I'm going to put this here, and I'm going to spin it to my 3 holes, line up. I'm going to take my screws again. And again, I'm just bringing them in until they're snug. I never tighten one screw down before I put all 3 in. I try to bring them down evenly so I'm not getting anything cocked in there. So I'm bringing that in, okay? So now I said I can't get this off. All right, it's just not coming off. I would normally take it now and I'm going to remove these cap screws. Remember those were our adjusting screws when we adjusted the suction cover? I want to remove those. And you can do this a couple of ways. You can bring these out and just leave them on a little bit and then continue removing it, or you can remove these all the way. I like removing them all the way. That's my preference. I put those off to one side. Now I'm going to go into the set screw. Remember I told you that we can use those set screws as a jacking screw. There's an O-ring on this suction cover. So to try to pull this off by hand, it's very difficult because I'm trying to bring it past that O-ring also. So I'm using this set screw, and if you look here, as I'm bringing this in, you can see it actually moving that suction cover out. And again, I do it evenly, so I'm not binding. Again, this is cast iron. You know, if I put too much pressure on one side or not enough on the other, a lot of times you can crack something. So I try to bring this stuff out evenly. But you can see it moving. And along the way, I test it to see if I'm getting movement. And you can see I am a little bit. I'm going to go a couple more turns, I think. And there's two different ways I can go. I can use pry bars, and I can pry behind here. And I know it's moving somewhat. If I was to do this, I wouldn't pry at this point. I would pry where a leg is because I have more support here. And if I'm getting too much friction, I want to be where the most support is. The other option is I could take a soft mallet and I can tap on it to move it out also. So right now we're going to try this because I'd much rather use pry bars if I can. And you can see how it's moving. And I move it until I can get it. And then I remove it. Here's the O-ring I was talking about. It sets in a groove. Right, and we always put a little film of soap on it when we're installing it to help slide up into the housing here. All right, so this is our cutter when it's installed in, the suction cover. So now I want to replace that. I'm going to turn this upside down. I'm now going to remove the three 3mm screws. I'm going to hold that because we know that this one came out fairly easy. Now there's a couple of ways we can do this. We can take the soft blow and we can tap down on this and tap it out. If you don't want to tap at that area, you can actually get a piece of PVC pipe and put to that diameter and hit that to drive this piece out of here. Okay? So that's removing your cutter. To put it on again, I would flip this back upside down. Make sure that our cutter's going in the right way. It's got a nice little lip there. Now, if you look here, when I put this in, when it's upside down, you can see how it's not sitting flat in there. So that tells me I don't want to drive these screws all the way in because I'm not going to seat anything correctly. But I do want to start them because what's going to happen is if I don't at least start them, when I flip this over, it's going to fall out and I'm going to be trying to get screws to line up and stuff. So I just get them so they're just starting. Then I'm going to turn it sideways and I'm going to bring them up snug. check them. There we just replaced the cutter ring on the GRP. And now we would put it back up onto the volute and make our adjustments like we did previously. And that's how you adjust the suction cover on a GRP and replace the stationary cutter rings on a GRP.